Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Secrets of a Witch podcast with me, Sabrina Scott. On this podcast, we talk about life, love, healing, trauma, spirituality, tarot, and more. And I'm really excited to be here with y'all. And I'm so appreciative that y'all give me a little bit of your brain whenever it is I release a new episode. So thank you so much. It is because of all of you that I get to do what I do. So thank you. And if there are any requests or any topics that you would like to hear me speak on, something that would be of service to your health and wellness, I would absolutely love to hear from you. So please do be in touch. And before the episode moves on, I just want to say I am experimenting with different ways of recording this episode. Right now, I'm just speaking into my phone. The last episode 200, I was recording through my AirPods. So I would love some feedback on which version gets better quality sound for you guys. I can't really tell the difference, but I'm sure some of y'all with better audio knowledge might have some opinions. And of course, with me recording it this way, you guys get to hear my cats doing things. So if you just heard a little bell, that's because one of my cats is trying to drink my soda water. Currently keep moving away from her face. But anyway, moving on. So today I wanted to talk about boundaries. And specifically, what are boundaries? Because I feel like a lot of people really misunderstand what boundaries actually are. Whether this is, the kind of oversharing, and don't get me wrong, I'm an oversharer myself. All the oversharing I see on social media, or especially threads, where for whatever reason in my algorithm, I keep getting threads of people talking about their boundaries and relationships and dating. And honestly, I love reading what people have to say. I love chiming in. I think it's super fun. I think Threads is really great in terms of the algorithm. It always shows me things I find interesting or stimulating, whether I agree or disagree. There's always something interesting going on there. But anyway, it seems like a lot of people don't really get what a boundary actually is. So I'll give an example. And I don't remember this person's name, it doesn't really matter, but a thread popped up in my algorithm where this gentleman was sharing his experience on a dating app, and he was like, oh yeah, so this girl told me, she asked me, like, why did your last relationship end? And so he was like, yeah, I told her, and then she accused me of trauma dumping and got all critical, and she did not respect my boundaries. And so the context here is that this guy claims to be a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I totally respect that, been there, done that. So my heart goes out to everyone who has been on the other side of that type of behavior. It sucks. I totally get it. And so what is the problem here, right? Because some people might think, well, no, he's just being transparent and he's being honest and he's being vulnerable and he's sharing from his heart and blah, 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 blah. And so I actually don't agree with that. So let me just analyze this situation, this example I'm giving, and then I will move along to talk more about boundaries specifically. So there's a lot of problems here. And so one of the problems is this guy actually is oversharing. I don't think sharing the deep, dark depths of your abuse and trauma history is something to really get into over the first day or so of messages on a dating app. I just find that really inappropriate. It's oversharing, and I also think it shows that person has really poor boundaries. Because when we share our histories of trauma, I guess it's a little bit different for anyone like me who is a public person and who is sharing in a creator, writer, thought leader type of space. It's a little bit different. That's kind of what we do. That's our thing. We talk about our life and we give some examples and we learn from our experience and we share that and we share these little lessons and et cetera, from our own experience, that's one thing. But this is just a kind of normal person who is in a dating app context. And even then, whenever I'm in a dating app context, that is absolutely not what I lead with at all. I think it shows a really poor understanding of the context of the situation. It shows an inability to accurately read the other person. And let's be real, when we've just exchanged a few messages with someone on a dating app, we don't really know them. We don't know if they're a safe, kind, good person. They could be insane. Who knows? And so to share this really intimate, vulnerable information about ourselves, about an abuse history that we probably do want to have received with love and kindness from the other person, we're really taking a massive gamble. We're taking a big risk when we do something like that with a total stranger, where that intimacy and that trust and that really knowing a little bit more about each other, we haven't had the chance to really assess that yet. So the safest thing to do if you do have an abuse history is to keep your mouth shut about that stuff, at least at the beginning. And to say something like, it didn't end very well and it wasn't a great experience, but that's all I really feel called to say about that. We don't really have to go into detail, or we can just say something like, what, it didn't work out and we weren't on the same page. That might feel like you're bulldozing your own experience, but trust me, that is the safer way to go about things when we literally haven't even met someone yet. They are a complete total stranger. And I really just do recommend that folks withhold that information at first, not out of shame, not out of embarrassment, but because sometimes when we overshare that stuff to a complete stranger in the first few messages on a dating app where we haven't even met them yet, we are actually putting a target on our own back that says, hello, I'm really bad at reading people and I'm really bad at standing up for myself and I'm in a really bad place right now. Please take advantage of me because I am vulnerable. And I get it. Like in my younger years, I definitely made that mistake. So I speak from experience with this. Please learn from my fuck up when I was much younger. So please take that and put it in your pocket should you require that information. But you'll notice that in this example I'm giving from this gentleman on Threads, is he was saying that this woman, by not wanting him to quote unquote trauma dump, which I believe he likely was doing, that she was not respecting his boundary. And so he is basically saying that his boundary is that he should be able to say whatever the fuck he wants to a total stranger. That is what he's saying. And so the thing is that's not actually a boundary, because that basically is about the other person's reaction, and it's an attempt to control and manipulate what the other person does or what their reaction is by phrasing that to be your boundary, which absolutely makes no fucking sense. So what's interesting here is that this gentleman unfortunately has misunderstood the situation. When this woman is saying, hey, I don't want you to trauma dump, what she's actually doing is she's expressing her own boundaries. She's saying, hey, when you talk about this stuff, I'm uncomfortable with it. We don't really know each other well enough yet for me to feel comfortable going into this deep of a dive with you on your own mental health journey. I don't really want to talk with you about that. Because it's true, like many people might not ask that question, why did your last relationship end, thinking that they're going to get that crazy of an answer. Even though abusive relationships are pretty common, dysfunctional relationships are unfortunately also pretty common. But that woman might have just expected some kind of banal answer, more like, oh yeah, one of us wanted kids, the other one didn't, or one of us moved away for work, so it ended, or hey, we were incompatible in the bedroom, or something like that, where you do get some information on what this person's deal breakers are in terms of dating. And it can be a way to learn something new about someone in terms of whether or not you are compatible. Of course, I do think that based on what I saw on Threads, again, I don't know these people. I don't really care, but I do think this is such a great example because I do see people talking like this a lot, right? So she said that, I don't really want to talk about this. He reacted badly to her. What she was actually doing was setting a boundary and saying, I don't really want to hear your trauma dumping. I don't really know you yet. Not really my comfort zone. And he is saying that, oh, well, you have violated my boundary by not allowing me to say my story. And so this whole thing is fucked up. So let me explain what a boundary would actually look like from the gentleman's perspective in this conversation. So what a boundary would actually be is, I only want to share my story of trauma when people are in a space to really hear me. And if I don't feel heard and respected, and if people don't have the time and space to hear me babble about my trauma forever, then personally, I don't want to be in a relationship or a connection with that person. That could be a boundary. And then that boundary would be, I fuck off and I stop talking to this person on a dating app. That would be his boundary in the situation. And so the thing is, with a boundary, we don't actually get mad at other people, right? It has nothing to do with controlling other people. What it actually has to do with is controlling our own behavior. So in this example, him, let's say, respecting his own boundaries and doing a thing about boundaries he would be like, oh, okay, well, if I'm sorry I made you feel uncomfortable by sharing, but I'm in a place where I really need to talk about this with potential dates. That's just where I'm at in my journey. And if that doesn't work for you, then I bid you farewell. That's what that would actually look like if we're talking about boundaries. Because clearly in this example, these two people's boundaries just are not compatible. I think the woman in this situation has much healthier sense of personal boundaries and what's appropriate and what isn't based on levels of strangeness. I don't know how to phrase that, but based on how, if someone is a complete and total stranger, then it makes sense that we actually have really different boundaries with strangers and different comfort levels with strangers than we do with our friends and family and people who are closer to us. That is actually perfectly normal. And so I think what we're actually seeing with this example is the gentleman has pretty much no boundaries, which is not really a healthy sign, right? It's a sign that someone is really in their trauma. It's really not a good thing. But again, having a boundary is not about controlling someone else's behavior. I'll give a personal example. I know this might freak some of you guys out. So personally, one of my rules when I'm dating seriously or in relationships, this is going to maybe, freak some of you guys out. 18 plus warning here just for a second. So if I'm dating someone seriously, I actually have a no porn rule. And so it's just not my comfort zone. I don't like it. I think I'm hot. I think if the other person I'm dating seriously should also think I'm hot. And I personally think a relationship is healthiest physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, when the sexuality is just both those people pouring completely into each other. So instead of self-pleasuring, I would much prefer if my partner just texts me a sexy selfie or something, or even a dick pic or something, so that we can engage in some kind of sexuality together, even if that's across the distance. But the point is to put that sexual energy back into the relationship. And so if someone says hey, that doesn't work for me, I'm going to watch porn regardless, I would just say, okay, well, that doesn't really work for me. That is not where my boundaries are at. And so clearly, this is not going to work out. I wish you the best of luck with that. And so that's that. But notice it's not about, in this example, me begging or persuading or trying to control somebody. Notice how subtle this is. Because a lot of people might say, oh, Sabrina, like that does sound like you're controlling somebody. You're saying no porn if they're going to date you seriously. That sounds like you are controlling someone. And my answer to that is like, absolutely not. The person is free to do what they want. But if they do want to be in relationship with me, these are my particular boundaries and standards. If it turns out that they say they are not going to do that, and then they break that personal rule that I have, I would leave the situation. Because for me, that would be a betrayal of something that we both agreed on. And it should be something that both parties are genuinely cool with, rather than some kind of thing where people are not enjoying what those limitations are. So with a boundary, again, it's not about us with the boundary controlling someone. It's about us with the boundary controlling ourselves. It's about having standard operating procedures and algorithms that rule our own life, right? And so one of my longtime boundaries, which again I compromised on in my last situationship, my only situationship I've ever been in, hilarious. Lots of lessons on that I shared in a previous episode. But that boundary of I will not date someone who is married and separated but not yet divorced. It's not something I would ever do again. So that experience reminded me, oh yeah, this is exactly why I have this boundary. And so people might try to convince me now, we're super separated, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, my boundary is about my behavior. If I notice things that violate my standards or what my boundaries are, then I do not get involved. It's about me. And so I think where a lot of people go wrong is they will say that they have their own boundaries, and then they will use their own boundaries to like whack these other people it's people that they're dating or in a relationship with over the head. Rather than just being like, you know what, we're just incompatible here. Let's just call it. And I know I do suggest that pretty often, but I think that often people are so afraid of being alone. And I've got another episode coming up on that soon. People are so afraid of being alone that they would rather live in a state where their boundaries are constantly violated and they do nothing about it. And so the tough thing about having a boundary, like an actual real boundary, is that you actually do have to act on it. Otherwise, it's not a boundary. Like if you say my boundary is I'm going to leave you if you do ABC, and then the person does ABC and then you don't leave, like was that really a boundary? No, it was like a fake boundary. And I know it's really hard to stand our ground and follow up on what our word is, but that's also what integrity means, right? It's all, and I've got another episode on the back burner about integrity too and why it's so important. But we actually have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to put our behavior where our mouth is. We have to walk our talk. Otherwise, no one is going to respect our talk. If we say we have a boundary and that the consequences of someone ignoring our boundary are going to be ABC, and then they do ignore our boundary, and then we stick around and we don't do ABC, then we have shown that our word is not trustworthy, and we have shown that we respect other people more than we respect ourselves, and we also show that we're afraid of loss, afraid of being alone, afraid of detachment. And so the healthier our boundaries are, the stronger our sense of self is, the easier detachment becomes, even if and even when it hurts. And so I'll just briefly share the thing that actually made the situationship end. And I won't get into too much detail. This is just going to be super brief. But we had differing political opinions. We know each other for a really long time, so this was not a surprise to either of us. But the thing that really killed it for me was in a moment of political anger or something, he basically used my rape experience as a way to bully me about my conservative politics. Like, how could you support this party that blah, blah, blah. And it was a ridiculous thing for someone to say to me. And so for me, that crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. The level of disrespect was so ridiculously high and pretty much out of nowhere. Like, that person had never been that way with me before. Like, there was a few moments of like snark and banter around politics for sure, but that to me just crossed such a line that you can never uncross. Like, I'm really big on respect. I'm a pretty kind person. I know I talk shit on the internet. I'm a little bit sassy, but when I'm in a dating context, I'm actually incredibly sweet and loving and curious and respectful, actually. And so for me to have someone that I really cared about a lot and who supposedly cared about me use a moment of pain that I had experienced with the rape experience to basically stab me over ideology and politics, for me, there's no coming back from that. And so maybe a decade ago-ish, probably close to like 8 years ago, I had a relationship around that time end, and it ended actually for the same reason. Like, during the breakup conversation, that particular person 8 years ago had also said some very cruel things, using very sensitive information, using like wounds that I had basically in order to hurt me at that end point. And so this person did the same thing. And that experience 8 years ago basically taught me that one of my new rules, one of my new algorithms, one of my new, boundaries, should we say, was that if anyone I was dating or even a friend, anybody in my life used a wound, an intimacy, a thing I'd shared out of vulnerability, or a vulnerable thing about me, if someone had used something vulnerable about me to hurt me in an argument or whatever, then I would be done. The end, period. And so that is a boundary for me. That is a line in the sand that once that is crossed, there really is no repair. It's impossible. It's pretty much impossible. And there are very, very, very few instances where that repair has started to happen. I would say there was a similar incident with a family member, and that repair, I had to take a lot of space, and who knows if that will ever be fully repaired. I don't know. I'm open to it because the work seems to be happening, but again, it's at a distance. Anyway, this episode is not about that. But all of this to say that this boundary stuff is really important. If I had stuck around in this situationship, let's say after this person had said that to me, I would be showing this person that, oh, yeah, it's totally cool if like you say abusive things to me. That's completely fine. I love you. You're good looking and we're really compatible. So I'm just going to overlook that. No. And this is why boundaries are so important. And this is why it's so important for us to do that deep work and that self-reflection and make new rules for our life and our experience based on our past experience, so that we have these rules and algorithms to fall back on when we are really emotional or really hurt. Because when we are really emotional and really hurt, it's really easy to ignore and forget our own boundaries. We can be flooded with trauma information. We can be flooded with hurt feelings. We can be flooded with pain and shock. But when we know what our boundaries are, we can come back to that as an anchor. as a guidepost for what we should do in different situations if we are self-loving, if we are in our integrity, and if we are refusing to abandon ourselves. Because when love and emotions gets thrown into the picture, a lot of people make very silly decisions that are not very self-loving out of an allegiance to someone else, or an allegiance to a relationship, or an allegiance to the idea and fantasy of love. And so it's like, yeah, this situationship, for instance, had a lot of love for this person. But it doesn't matter. It does not matter because that boundary was violated. That boundary that wasn't spoken, but shouldn't need to be spoken. Right? And so the algorithm I have is to walk in that kind of situation. And I would highly encourage y'all to have the same boundary, regardless of love, quote unquote. And so when we have boundaries, again, it's about us. What are we going to do? What will our behavior be in different situations? I'll give another example of a boundary. This is from a few years ago. I remember going on a date and I had expressed on the date, like, I don't really feel comfortable kissing anyone who is smoking. I don't know how it came up in the conversation, but somehow it did. Midway through the date, the guy goes to the bathroom. Like, okay, comes back smelling like smoke. So clearly he went to the bathroom and then had a cigarette. Okay, whatever. He's exercising his autonomy as a sovereign individual. That's fine. But at the end of the date, he went in to kiss me and I was like, no, pushed him away. Like, hey, I had a great time with you, but I told you that I can't kiss people who have just smoked. I can't, it's not for me. And notice with the boundary, we actually don't need reasons. If I was to have said the reasons, I would have said, I think it smells disgusting. It's gross. Like, I'm sensitive to smells and chemicals, and like cigarettes just makes me feel very sick. And so I'm not comfortable. But I didn't say all of that stuff because, again, we don't need to explain our boundaries. We can just have them, however much or little sense they make to other people. So don't allow anyone else to minimize what your boundaries are. But again, we have to walk our talk. So I was like, hey, I'm sorry, I can't kiss you. I had a great time, but I don't see us dating because I am not comfortable dating people who are in active addiction and people who are smoking. And I did not know he was a smoker until that moment. And he was like, no, just give me a chance, like blah, blah, blah. He kept trying to convince me it's not a big deal, yada, yada, yada. And again, I had never asked him to not smoke. I just said, hey, I can't date a smoker, so we should end this here. I did not say, hey, we can date if you stop smoking. If I had done that, that would have been, in my opinion, not the right thing to do, because that is about me telling the other person what to do. And I don't actually really have that much interest in doing that. I would rather just say, hey, this is my boundary. I can't really fuck with smokers in that way. Friends, cool, whatever. But like a dating context, there's no way. So this is not going to work. Goodbye. And the thing is, having that boundary means it doesn't matter how good looking someone is. It doesn't matter how fun the date was. It doesn't matter because I have that boundary. I always have to act in accordance with that boundary. And that is my responsibility. If someone else wants to quit smoking in order to date me, which some people have tried to do, and they've never been able to succeed at doing it, they always fall off the wagon, which is why I have this boundary. I would, like, if they said, yeah, I'm going to quit smoking to date you, I'd be like, okay, sure. Like, call me in 3 months, like when you haven't smoked in 3 months, and we can pick up from there. That sounds great. But no one has been able to successfully do that, though a few have definitely tried. And this is why boundaries are so important, why boundaries are about us. Because I know if I would have said yes to those relationships, I would have always been like in police mode. Did you smoke? Did you not smoke? Did you fall off the wagon? I would have been micromanaging, and I do not want to live my life that way. And that is also a really, I think, shitty relationship to boundaries. Boundaries should not be used to control other people. Boundaries should be used to control ourselves. That is where a lot of people fuck up in how they understand boundaries. A boundary is about what do we do if someone violates a boundary that we have. And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes the boundary needs to be violated for us to even know that we have it in the first place. You know, like I had to date someone who was smoking in order to even develop that boundary for myself. I won't get into that, but there's some behavior around that I found out over the course of that relationship that I really did not like. I didn't like the compulsive aspect of it. And so I don't really have any interest in dealing with anyone who's in that space. No disrespect, no judgment. It just doesn't work for me. That's not how I want to be living my life. That's not where I want to be sharing space in a romantic context. And so again, no matter how good the vibe is, I have to say no. So I hope all of these examples help y'all understand boundaries a little bit better, because I do think that they get misunderstood. And I think the way that people talk about boundaries is they often will use it to control someone else, but that is really not what boundaries are about at all. Boundaries are about you. Boundaries are about you controlling your own behavior. Boundaries are about you self-regulating and making sometimes really difficult decisions in order to be in integrity with yourself. It's tough. And sometimes we can walk away from people that we love, situations that might be lucrative to us in other ways. But if something doesn't feel right, if something is not aligned, we owe it to ourselves to respect our own boundaries and to control our own behavior and to be people who are exercising our own sovereignty out of our own self-respect for ourselves, rather than always kissing the ass of other people because we are so afraid to be alone. Boundaries are really important for individuation, self-actualization, identity. Boundaries are really associated, at least in my mind, with that third chakra, the yellow one, the solar plexus. They are very much about will. Who are you? How do you act? What are your values? What is important to you? Are you just, flapping around in the wind wherever the wind will take you? Or do you have a strong sense of who you are and what works for you and what doesn't? And when we're younger, it does make sense that we don't have all those answers to who am I? What do I like? What do I not like? What works for me and what doesn't? It takes a long time to figure that out. But in our 30s and 40s especially, we do start to figure it out. And it's like, okay, now it does make sense to have some of these SOPs, standard operating procedures, for our own lives. We get a better idea of who am I. And this is, I think, true especially after a Saturn return. And I think it can loop back with each Saturn return that we have. Who am I? Right? I don't want to get into that. That's a whole other topic. So I'll leave it there for now. I hope that was at least interesting or thought-provoking, and I hope it helps you understand the concept of boundaries a little bit better, because a lot of people with the movement of therapy speak into the public sphere, into social media. A lot of people are just throwing around these terms, but don't actually have much of an idea about what it means. And so I just want to underline again, a boundary is about you, your own behavior, and what you're going to do. If someone does ABC, you're going to do XYZ. That's what it's about. A boundary is not about forcing other people to do things. It is about us governing ourselves wisely in accordance with our own personal comfort levels and standards. I think it's super important. Okay, y'all, that's it for now. You know where to find me on Instagram, Sabrina M. Scott. My website is sabrinamscott.com. My YouTube is youtube.com/Sabrina Scott. You can send me an email, CEO at sabrinamscott.com. And on my website, you can also see a little bit about the tarot reading offerings that I do. I do have some courses available as well on my website. And I do have some space for a few more coaching clients. So if you do want to work on any of this stuff, boundaries, self-worth, self-actualization, coming into yourself, I would absolutely love to work with you. So let's see what magic we can create together. Okay, friends, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the total lunar eclipse this past week. The vibes are still vibing. All right, friends, that's it from me. Till next time, see you later. Bye.